You did it. You journeyed through several valleys in the Bible, and now we're going to wrap up our Bible study together looking at Ezekiel 37, the Valley of Dry Bones. I reached out to a friend recently, and he texted me back with this direct message. He said this: spiritually, I'm in a dry spell. I'm not flourishing at all. Honestly, my faith feels brittle, like one more loss and I might snap. Now, my friend's ministry life had bottomed out. He wanted to share that it wasn't just one thing, it was a litany of grievances that had ground him down. And the loss he grieved the most, he lost his confidence in God. This was no walk through a death valley. He was visiting the grave sites of church work. Dream after dream of his had been buried under church hurt and disillusionment. And I really felt for him. You know, it's funny, I thought as a guy, he's likely never received social media ads about preventing osteoporosis, the weakening of our bones. But as soon as he said the words brittle, I pictured the calcium supplements Instagram has been pushing into my feed. My pastor friend was suffering not with a weakening of bones, but with a weakening of hope. And according to the Mayo Clinic, osteoporosis causes bones to become weak and brittle. So brittle that all fall, or even just a little fall or a mild stress, it can bend. Even just a cough, it can fracture your bones because the creation of new bone doesn't keep up with the loss of old bone. And my friend's experience in ministry, it was similar to what happens with osteoporosis. His weakened faith had left him vulnerable to any new ministry stress. Every disappointment in its own right was something rather mild, but in his weakened state, it felt like a crack in his hope hemisphere. And his story and yours, they might share some similarities, but it might not be ministry woes for you that keep you feeling like you're losing a battle in your death valleys. Maybe your confidence in God has been shaken. I know what that feels like. Maybe you just wonder if God's company is going to be a comfort for you in the future. Or why does God's victories not feel like wins? Why does his power seem to be thwarted? I want to share those burdens with you because I too question why some death valleys become open graves and not a memorial site of victory. So up until this point in the valleys we've studied together, we've looked at battlefields, locations where shadows cast doubt on our future. But this week, we're going to see a much darker kind of valley in Ezekiel 37. The valley is a graveyard, a place where Israelite warriors seemed to be cursed. And the valley of dry bones in Ezekiel 37 is imagery for hopeless people. But it doesn't have to leave them there. In the middle of a graveyard, death is resurrected to new confidence in God. So if you have time to dig into Ezekiel's whole story, do it. It's a fascinating read. But for our purposes in this Bible study, I want to give you a few noteworthy aspects of Ezekiel's life and spend the bulk of our time exploring the Valley of Dry Bones. So here's what I want you to know about Ezekiel. Ezekiel was the son of Buzi, and he was a part of a tribe in Israel that served as priests. Although Ezekiel never got to fulfill his calling as a priest because he, along with God's people, they were exiled from their land into the territory of Babylon. If you know the pain that accompanies preparing and planning for a future that never comes to fruition, you are connected to Ezekiel's story and to the people he ministered to. Even though he was part of the Jerusalem priesthood, his entire ministry was performed outside of Israel. So right from the start, Ezekiel's life story is set up as a long, deep valley in Israel's history, and it also represents the loss of his birthright calling even before it began. All situational hardships pointed to unrealized dreams and disappointment. And at first glance, without digging into Bible commentaries, Ezekiel's behavior in his book, it's concerning at best. I mean, sometimes he feels unhinged or even deranged in Ezekiel, but the thing is about him, he obeys God. So even though sometimes he acts a little paranoid or erratic, I do have to wonder about his marriage, but I know that he followed God. And scholars, they have all sorts of opinions about Ezekiel's odd behavior. I'm just going to chalk it up to a mystery because for our purposes, what I'm interested is bringing your attention to this story about deported people and that he was ministering to them in a place where they had no hope. The Jews Ezekiel prophesied to, they were distraught because they were forced out of their home. They were grieving that they were not living the way God intended for them to live, to worship in Jerusalem with the temple. So put yourself in their shoes for a moment. You're supposed to be in your home, the land promised to you by God, Babylonian powers take over where you live. They deny you access to your city and to your temple where you worship God. I mean, imagine how defeated you would feel. Every person hearing Ezekiel's sermons or listening to his prophecies in his book, they were cynical, they were bitter, and they were angry with God. They felt brittle, like they were about to snap. And so in the passage we're going to look at together in your study guide, it's going to be a lot of ashy ruins, a lot of hope deferred. And you and the people listening to Ezekiel might share a few things in common, namely a crisis of faith. I mean, who among us doesn't start to question God's goodness when our prayers seem to be unanswered and his promises keep going unkept? Which one of us doesn't tilt our head with suspicion when God seems to be sleeping on the job? There is another layer to this Israelite story that I want to point out to you. They were in this mess because of their own wrongdoing. They'd given themselves over to idolatry time and time again, resisting God's instruction for fidelity to him alone. And this time, when they begged for more idols, God finally gave them what they wanted. And one of the consequences was displacement from their home. And I wonder if sandwiched between their bitterness and anger with God was this like thick layer of shame. You're going to see that the valley of dry bones is filled with corpses. And yet, it becomes a place where resurrection is possible. If you know in full or in part what it's like to have your spiritual bones dried up, or to have your hope gone, or you feel like cut off from your life source, Jesus, I'm convinced when you study this story, your confidence in God will grow. It will be revived. You're going to get to see life after death and land after exile. You're going to hear ancient words of God that seem to meet you in your valley now. You're going to see that God can do something with dry bones and grave sites. You're going to see that even when everything seems dead, our God is still a God of resurrection life. So before I send you to the study guide, I want you to ponder two things about the valley of dry bones. The first thing I want you to see when you read is that you're going to come back to life. If you know Jesus as your Savior, then anything that feels lost or dead or lifeless, it's coming back to life when Jesus returns. This is a reality that awaits all Christians, and it's good news, isn't it? Until then, Christ's resurrection power is available to you now in what I call micro resurrections. You know that nagging, broken relationship you want reconciled? The wayward child, the opportunities lost, the wages stolen from you. You know, the time you feel like you're never going to get back. It seems as good as dead. And yet, God can work a miracle, even now. And the thing is, even if he doesn't work a miracle, your future is still bright, because when Christ comes back to remake the world, he's going to remake you too. Okay, second thing I want you to see is that you will see God's promises fulfilled. It might not be on this side of eternity, but you will see God's promises fulfilled. Every ache of your heart, every prayer left unanswered, every failure, all of it, it's going to find its completion in the new heaven and the new earth. Christ is returning. He's going to resurrect this world. And according to the scriptures, when God recreates, he invites us to watch him do it. And I think that's what John alludes to in the book of Revelation when he says, there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. And for the first heaven and the first earth, they're going to pass away. And there's no longer going to be any sea. There's going to be a holy city, a new Jerusalem coming down out of the heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And we're going to hear a loud voice say, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God, and he's going to wipe every tear from their eye. There will be no more death, no more mourning, no more crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. And now he who is seated on the throne says, I am making everything new. And then God will say, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. Ezekiel's vision in the study we're going to story gives us vision that when life bottoms out, our valleys become a place where our faith can flourish. And it serves as a reminder to you and me that a day is coming when all the wrongs in this world will be made right. All God's promises will be fulfilled, and all of our dreams will be realized.